Cattle mutilation is the phenomenon encompassing the killing and mutilation of cattle under unusual and mysterious circumstances. But could it simply be natural decomposition or normal predators, as some suggest? Or perhaps it is cults or secretive governmental and military agencies? Or could it be some more otherworldly intervention at play? Please note that this episode contains discussion of a graphic and sensitive nature that some listeners may find disturbing.
Aliens Explored is a weekly podcast exploring famous and obscure cases of UFO sightings, alien abductions and other strange events from both a believing and a skeptical perspective, whilst keeping an open mind. I'm Stu Jackson, a professional actor and amateur ufologist with a particular interest in the crop circle phenomenon. I'll be debating that otherworldly visitations are real. The truth is out there.
And I'm Neil Kelly. I'm a professional actor as well and used to work for the military as an intelligence analyst. I'll be arguing from a more doubtful point of view. I mean, it's all a bit far-fetched, isn't it? Hello everyone and welcome back to the Aliens Explored podcast. My name is Neil and I'm joined this evening by
Stu Jackson.
Stu Jackson.
Hello.
Sorry, I should say I'm Neil Kelly, and the topic for discussion this episode is cattle mutilation.
Yeah, it's a bit of a gory topic, this one, isn't it?
It's an odd one, yes. Yeah.
So we've gone off and done our research. I stupidly did mine just before dinner. What did you? So this is a phenomenon that you'd not come across before, isn't it, Neil?
Well, I had heard of animals being mutilated. I think it was goat ripping, which was blamed on Satanists. In fact, some of the cattle mutilation here was for a while blamed on the activities of Satanists doing it for whatever reason.
Yes.
Interestingly, cattle mutilation or animal mutilation, according to Wikipedia, it dates all the way back to 1606 and the reign of James I, when these mysterious mutilations started to occur.
Well, that was certainly when it was first, when there's a record of it first being reported. In many respects, I liken that a bit to the crop circle phenomenon. Where you've got a similar sort of a report from probably around the same sort of time when they talk about the lawn mowing devil. The mowing devil, not the lawn mowing devil.
The mowing devil
sounds like a brand name. But yeah, so it's clear that to me then that something like this has been around. It's been with us for hundreds of years.
Well, unexplained deaths and mutilations of livestock, basically. I read one report. I think it was an FBI investigator saying that typically there are three causes of death of livestock. There's basically accidents, eating poisonous plants, drowning in rivers, getting struck by lightning, that sort of thing. There's predation. Certainly in America, you've got bears and wolves and cougars, that sort of thing. And thirdly, human activity. People killing them for fun or food sometimes. But these particular mutilations seem to have aspects of them which can't be explained. Which are
certainly
very
not easily
explained. The lack of any kind of we're talking in some cases of quite large animals being destroyed, full size 600-pound bulls, without any of the surrounding bushes or undergrowth being disturbed, without any kind of signs of a struggle or damage to the animal's limbs. And then apparently mutilated in quite a clinical way.
Yes.
Some of the pictures I've seen, they seem to have been completely skinned, everything removed, so that from the shoulders up there's just a skeleton. Or sometimes it's just eyeballs, jaws, tongues removed. Often the genitals and anus removed.
Yeah.
And again, quite surgically. So, yes, it's a difficult thing to.
You've got clean surgical lines. You've got the lack of blood. So quite often, a lot of these cases, although the animal might be found with these gaping wounds, the wounds have actually been cauterized. Now, if you can show me a predator, a cougar or bear or something that goes around cauterizing wounds, I'd like to see that. But there are cases, quite a few cases as well, where the animals have been completely drained of blood.
Yes, and they all seem to have been completely drained of blood, and with no sign of venal collapse, which normally happens if you drain an animal's blood. The veins collapse.
Well, yeah, because there's nothing to support them.
No, but for some reason this hasn't happened. So there was a case. Where's the ones that I came across? There was a particular case relating to a horse called Lady. That's quite
a famous case, that one.
Out in 1967, September the 9th, Agnes King and her son Harry found the dead body of their 3-year-old horse, Lady. The head and neck had been skinned and defleshed. The body displayed cuts that looked very precise, no blood at the scene, and a strong medicinal odour in the air. There was no evidence to support the assertion that the horse's death was associated in any way to abnormal causes. The county sheriff told them the death was probably due to a lightning strike, although he never bothered to visit the site. And early press coverage of the case misnamed Lady as Snippy. Snippy apparently being the horse who had sired Lady and belonged to the husband.
It's interesting you mentioned about lightning strike being a potential cause, because in many cases, I don't think it was the case with Lady, and I'm working off memory now, so I might be wrong, but certainly in a lot of cases you do get charred outlines around the bodies of the animals in the ground itself, which is quite weird. But what's particularly weird is when you combine that with the fact that quite often there are no tracks. There's no footprints, tyre prints. Sometimes for like a good, 10, 20, 30 metres around the animal.
Including the tracks that the animal would have made. Like someone,
exactly.
But then I'm thinking, well, has someone just swept up the tracks? Someone just gone round with a broom and done a very careful job of removing any tracks? Why aren't the animals' tracks there? Someone suggested that with these animals they should look for an indentation in the ground beneath them, because they're saying that if they're being picked up by alien spacecraft, the aliens do what they do with them in their craft and then just drop them from a great height. But I would think if you dropped an animal from a great height onto solid ground, it wouldn't just leave a dent in the ground. The animal would just be splattered in all directions.
Yes,
with a much less mysterious. Well, the death would be quite. Well, it'd still be a mysterious death. But
but it'd be it'd be a different mystery. Yes.
I mean, in the case of Lady, 2 students from Alamosa State College confessed to sneaking out into the pasture and shooting the horse several weeks after the case was publicised. But again, that could just be muddying the waters.
Well, and you know, again, I'll refer to a famous thing with crop circles. That sounds like Doug and Dave, you know, who claim to have done all the crop circles just for a bit of fame and notoriety, when they clearly haven't. So I mean, there was no bullet wound with lady. There was no bullet, which you would expect. So yeah, but it's weird. Now I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here, but I find it really bizarre when you get these genuine mysteries like this, and people just come forward and say, "Oh yes, I did it." I gotta wonder. All right, are they just doing it for fame, for their moment? You know, their Andy Warhol 15 minutes of fame kind of thing, or are they doing it, I wonder, because they've been paid to do it or threatened to do it, so that the government can just say, "Oh look, here's a rational explanation"?
No, I think it is a thing. There are people who just confess to things. Whenever there's a serial killer going around, there will be people. The police have to deal with people false. The police have to deliberately withhold details of the case that only the real perpetrator would know about, so that they can screen out these false confessions.
Really,
people feeling it. I mean, I don't know if you're old enough to remember the case of the Yorkshire Ripper.
Oh, yes,
and the police
Peter Sutcliffe.
Peter Sutcliffe, but the police also received a confession from a chap with a Newcastle accent who he was basically taunting the police, confessing to the crimes and taunting the police and saying, "Ha ha, you'll never catch me." And it hampered the investigation because the police assumed it was genuine, and it took them right off track for quite a long time. So when they eventually caught Sutcliffe, their next investigation said, "Well, now we want to catch this other guy," because quite plainly it wasn't Sutcliffe who sent us that. But yeah, it seems to be a common thing with anything bizarre or horrible. People want to confess to it.
Well, they never did catch us, like.
Yeah.
Anyway,
did they never catch him? They call him Geordie John.
I have no idea.
I think that Geordie John, I think his name was.
Geordie John. That's not very original.
No. But I mean, these mutilations weren't restricted to just animals. There was one involving a human being.
Oh, the Levette Cunningham case.
The Jonathan Master Sergeant Jonathan P. Levette, back in 1956. Yeah. Air Force Sergeant.
I'm glad you found that one.
Yeah, well,
because that's.
Sorry. Yeah, he was.
There's two really interesting points. One is the actual case itself, but also it plays heavily into Project Grudge and basically the cover up that actually was. It's like a smoking gun in a way. Now, for those listeners who are not familiar with Project Grudge. Project Grudge was the predecessor to Project Blue Book, which is much more famous and was the government's report in an investigation into the UFO phenomenon. Kind of like your real life X-Files.
Yeah.
But Project Grudge was before Project Blue Book and was, I suppose, just an earlier equivalent. And there were a number of reports in it. Now, the Levette Cunningham case was report 13. Now, since all this time, I mean, like you said, this was back in the 50s, and things become declassified after a period of time, and cases 1 to 12 have become public knowledge, and cases 14 onwards have become public knowledge, but they've never released case 13. The government's always said there is no case 13. Well, I'm sorry, you don't just skip a number because you feel like it. I mean, all right, superstition, fair enough. But here's the thing: you're doing a formal government investigation into unexplained phenomena. are you going to allow superstition to inform? That would be a bit, I don't know, a bit wrong. So yeah, the fact that they've never released this, but you've had Cunningham's reports, haven't you?
Just for the benefit of our listeners, what the Cunningham case was about, there was an Air Force Sergeant, Jonathan P. Lovett, who was assisting Major William Cunningham in the White Sands missile testing grounds near Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. This was in March 1956. Now, they were out searching for scattered debris from a recent rocket test, and they'd split up. I think they were on opposite sides of a sand dune. Cunningham was shocked when he heard a loud scream, and he thought that Lovett had been bitten by a snake, so he hurried round to the other side of the dune. But instead of finding his sergeant nursing a snake bite, what he found was Lovett being dragged by a long, as it described, long serpentine arm wrapped around his legs, which was connected to a silver disc hovering in the air 15 to 20 feet away. And this thing dragged Lovett into the disc, and then the thing flew away. Cunningham just, he was a bit taken aback, as I suppose any of us would have done.
Be terrified. Can you imagine? I mean, just to pause the story just there for a moment. Imagine that situation. You're there. There's the two of you out on manoeuvres or whatever they were doing. I mean, imagine it's you and me out there. I go round this corner. You hear me scream, and then you run round, and I'm being dragged away by a metallic serpentine
tentacle that's just come out and grabbed you.
Into a flying saucer.
Yeah, so something definitely happened to Lovett, because his body was found 3 days later. From all indications, the body had been exposed to the elements for 24 to 48 hours. So that leaves at least 1 day when it wasn't exposed to the elements. That there's a missing day there. It was severely mutilated. His tongue had been cut from the lower portion of the jaw, his eyes gouged out, and his anus removed. There seems to be a thing about anuses. They'd removed his anus.
It's a common thing. That and sexual organs is a very common theme. Yeah, absolutely.
It seems to be. As for Cunningham, he went back to the base and stumbled towards his jeep, radioed for assistance. Cunningham was confined to the base hospital for observation and treatment after retelling what he believed he had witnessed. Now, I think another CIA project that this touches on is the MK Ultra mind control project. The Americans had been very shocked by the behaviour of prisoners of war in Korean prison camps during the Korean War, 1950 to 53. How discipline had completely broken down compared to troops that had been captured from other nations. It was a United Nations war, so there were French, British, Turkish prisoners, but particularly the Americans seemed to have completely broken down in captivity. And this whole thing about mind control, and this is when brainwashing entered the lexicon. And so the CIA became very interested in mind control, and they picked up on a Nazi project. I don't know if it was part of Operation Paperclip after the war, but the Nazis had been experimenting with hallucinogens on prisoners in the Dachau prison camp to basically break them down. They had all sorts of ideas for mind control, that they could basically certainly get foreign agents to expose themselves, get people to divulge information they otherwise wouldn't divulge. Also, I'm trying to think of they were doing all sorts of experiments with LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
From about 1953, 1954 onwards, including administering it to civilians and military. Obviously, military and one they control, without their knowledge, and then observing them. So, the fact that Cunningham saw something quite so bizarre, is it possible that he could have been under the influence of a psychedelic drug, which often, something stressful can trigger a flashback that throw you into. It
certainly can. Do you know? I could accept that if this was an isolated case. But we're not talking about. Firstly, we're not talking about the guy just like thinking he's seen something and there's no evidence to back it up. The other guy disappeared and then was found 3 days later.
Yeah, 10 miles away.
Specific surgical procedures that have been done on him that mirror the exact cattle mutilations that we're talking about that are happening globally. You know, I mean, we've mentioned a lot of cases in America, and certainly that seems to be where it happens a lot. But it happens all over. I mean, it happens here in the UK. There were some cases. It's one of those interesting. It's not been happening quite so much, or certainly we've not been hearing about it quite so much in recent years. But in 2011, there was a case in Wales where it happened to a lot of cattle. Virtually overnight. So it. So I don't know if it was just from his imagination. How come it mirrors these cattle mutilations so closely?
I'm just thinking of what he thought he saw. This tentacle dragging his sergeant into a hovering disc. Whether it was he did actually see that, or whether he was hallucinating. Certainly, something did cart him off, but how much Cunningham's testimony can be trusted?
Okay, but that'd be a hell of a coincidence, though, wouldn't it?
It would. I mean, we know that the CIA have been up to all kinds of weird stuff with people. So,
and definitely with mind control, as you say. I mean, it's basically common knowledge that they do that sort of thing, and I'm not disputing that for a moment. I just I find that I would find that to be an incredible coincidence that, you know, he happened to imagine or hallucinate a particular thing happening that years, decades later happens to associate with what happened to his mate. You know, I don't know. That just all seems a bit. I mean, I'm good at making leaps with my imagination, which is probably why I sit very firmly on the I believe fence. But even that, I don't know. That just seems a bit hard to quantify that level of coincidence.
Yeah.
But certainly, I mean, more terrestrial reasons have tried to be given. Like you said, you know, lightning strikes have been explained. Predators, they've tried to explain these things as, you know, things like the eyes being removed as quite a thing. Oh yeah, well that's carrion. Well, no, they're removed with such surgical precision that carrion wouldn't do. You know, tongues being separated from the lower jaw but not actually being removed. What predator does that?
Or remove the digestive organs, which most predators will avoid those. I've seen a cat eat a mouse, and at the end there was nothing left but the digestive organs, because the cat knows they're full of stuff you don't really want to eat.
Yes, absolutely. There was one case of a cow. You know, you're looking. I think you mentioned £600 bull. That would be quite a small bull, because most cows run at about £1,500, don't they? So you imagine a £1,500. That's what's that? Half a ton.
That's a big animal, isn't it?
It's a big, heavy animal. I wouldn't like to lift one, that's for sure. But there was a case of one being found sort of on its back, like legs in the air, cartoon style almost, on its back. The chest cavity had been... It had various things done to it. I think, again, the anus had been removed and things like that, and the udders had been removed. But its chest cavity was open. The heart had been exposed, but it was still in place, and it was like, I think it had been removed, but it was still attached. Okay, well, you can't explain that for a predator. If they're going to go for something like, they're going to rip it out and, chow down. But
and there will be blood all over the place.
There would be blood all over the place. I mean, they're trying to explain that as, insects come along and feast on the blood. Well, I'm sorry, a 1,500-pound cow's got a lot of blood in its system.
Yes.
And
a lot of it will just dry and leave a blood stain. If you talk about the desert, under the desert sun.
Well, you'd soak into the ground, you'd be able to take soil samples, and there it'd be. Yeah, it wouldn't be difficult. This is definitely a weird phenomenon. And of course, there are cases of UFO sightings in and around the times that cattle mutilations happen. Not in every case, obviously, but because most cattle mutilations, they just find it the following day, or even a few days later in some cases. But no, there's quite a few reports of people witnessing UFO activity, even calling it in, and then the following day discovering that the cattle's been mutilated. Which I find, again, that's too much of a coincidence to just be a coincidence. In my book. But now we talked about, when we've talked about predators, though, we've talked about animals, bears, cougars, whatever else. You get wolves. I don't know. I was rubbish at biology as a kid, so I don't know, animals. But of course, the number one predator we haven't really gone into detail is the possibility of people doing it. Now, you mentioned earlier that satanic cults have been blamed for a lot of these things. And whilst I think, yes, I can see that happening if we're talking about a small number of cases. But we're talking about so many cases in so many countries, going back so long. I don't know, there's got to be something more. But the other big cult thing that I've heard as a theory is that it's the government themselves, and they've been doing it as a way of tracking, BSE or things like that. And I think they'd cover it up and make it look more natural if they were going to do that.
You would think, wouldn't you? But there were lots of things that just couldn't be explained. I mean, there was in the case of. Is this the case of later? No, this is a case of cattle. The animal's heart, as well as bone and muscle samples, were sent to the Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory for microscopic and bacteriological studies. Samples from the animal's liver were sent to 2 separate private laboratories. Now, samples from the animal's liver were found to be completely devoid of copper and to contain 4 times the normal amount of zinc, potassium and phosphorus. And the scientists were unable to explain these anomalies. Blood samples taken at the scene were reported to be light pink in colour and did not clot after several days, while the animal's hide was found to be unusually brittle for a fresh death. Animal was estimated to have been dead for 5 hours, and the flesh underneath was found to be discoloured. It's all sorts of weird things. None of the laboratories were able to report any firm conclusions on the cause of blood or tissue damage. At the time, it was suggested that a burst of radiation may have been used to kill the animal, blowing apart its red blood cells in the process. The hypothesis was later discarded as subsequent reports from the Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory later confirmed the presence of anticoagulants in samples taken from cows mutilated in the region. So, all sorts of weird anomalies as to the state of these creatures. Things that just don't add up.
It's an interesting one, isn't it?
It is. It's a weird one. And I mean, I know of, the things like the goat ripping that have been associated with satanic groups or whatever. I mean, I suppose in days gone by, especially as these things were being reported at the time of James I, it was probably put down to witches or evil spirits.
Undoubtedly.
I suppose, they would have. They would have ascribed it a supernatural cause. Well, I suppose the supernatural phenomena of the modern era are the UFOs.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at legends like Chupacabra that could easily be blamed for, and the loss of blood as well. We look at our own sort of mythological history, and we look at vampires and things like that. It's very easy to see. It's very easy to see, in fact, where our mythological history could actually have stemmed from. But now we keep a more open scientific mind. Science is the new religion. So UFOs become the new supernatural. Aliens become the new supernatural. Absolutely.
Yeah, they're the modern day fairies or vampires. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that was it's there's something going on. But in all my in my research for this episode, I have found it very interesting that the cases seem to have dropped off over the last few years.
They seem to peak in the 60s and 70s, but they were still going on fairly recently, weren't they?
Well, sort of 10 years ago is when they started to drop off, it seems. But I'm intrigued by that, and what would cause a drop-off in these things. So, again, if you're looking at, it's natural predators or something like that, it wouldn't just suddenly drop off. Not unless you've got a massive ecological shift, if like, I don't know, all the bears died out, then that might explain it. But no, there's seemingly no the fact it's dropping off is as much a mystery as the fact it happened in the first place. And it's just, to me, that suggests an intelligent
agency that like us, someone's got a budget for doing a certain kind of research, and maybe his masters are no longer interested in the aspect of animal anuses or whatever that.
Or maybe they've just learnt everything there is to learn. Everything they wanted to learn. Maybe. I don't know. But the fact that the reports go back to the 1600s. I don't know, it seems weird that it would stop now. I have this is a little bit far out, but I have this theory that we are building up to something, and something quite imminent. When you look at the UFO sightings that have increased over the last few years, you've got things like this that have, it's changed. Something is changing, and I feel we're building. I think honestly we're building up to some sort of revelation, where we're going to get a landing on the White House lawn or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And certainly the fact they've been carried out over a prolonged length of time or sporadically in periods. Well, if these are being carried out by interdimensional beings, then they would just appear at different. Time isn't linear. I mean, we kind of understand time differently now. It's not all things happening consecutively. So, because something to us was recorded 400 years ago, it doesn't necessarily mean that for creatures in another dimension that was 400 years ago. They just pop in different times and what have you. So. I can understand, it didn't take them 400 years to learn all they need to know about the anuses of cattle.
I'm sure. It's just certain there's more to it than that.
Yeah, but because we experienced it as a 400-year period doesn't necessarily mean that they did, because they're working to a different dimension.
Yeah, very insightful. So, to summarise cattle mutilations then, so I sit very firmly on that there's an intelligence behind it, and it's a non-human intelligence. To me, there are so many mysteries that cannot be explained behind it, that very simply, if it was people doing, I think it's very easy to rule out other animals doing it. I think if it was people doing it, I think there'd be far more signs, there'd be far more evidence, people would actually be getting caught doing it. So I think there's an intelligence behind it. I don't think it's a human intelligence, and that, to my mind, we're talking aliens or non-human entities. Anyway, I'm hesitant with the word aliens. Otherworldly.
I'm thinking of it. If it is humans, then it'll be humans who are part of a closed group, like the CIA or other intelligence agency. If it was just something that was a bit of a movement, a bit of a club, and people were doing it all over, that it just kind of caught on as a trend, people would be talking about it. It would have leaked out on social media. They'd have a Facebook group. They would. Where they would share this stuff. Even if it was on the dark web, they would still be sharing this stuff, and it would be there to be. Yeah. It would be there to be found. So, yes, it's very. I mean, obviously, I'm inclined to look for, I suppose, reasons that I can relate to. Before, but there seems to be no rhyme or reason to this. It's just very, 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 very strange.
Is this it? Is this the moment that we convert you and you become a believer?
Well, I wouldn't say I was entirely a disbeliever. There's a big universe out there, and I'm sure we aren't the only life forms in the universe, because I think that's as bizarre a tenet to stick to as to suggest that we're regularly being visited or have a permanent presence here. That people from another dimensional planet have infiltrated us. They're probably ruling us. That's probably why our governments are making such bizarre decisions these days that seem intent on destroying us. So, yeah, it's very mysterious, and there's so many aspects of it that I just can't. I can't say how that could have happened.
So
obviously, I'm only seeing this.
What do you think? Sorry, go
on. It seems it's being done by something intelligent. The fact this has happened, particularly the Air Force sergeant being dragged off into a flying saucer, but. It's so strange. It's definitely being done by something that we just don't know about. Even people who are adamant that it's being done by some humans. I mean, the owners of Sylvie's Valley Ranch are willing to pay a $25,000 reward for any tip that leads to an arrest and conviction. They're still thinking along those lines. So. Yeah, so obviously we're going to go on second-hand evidence, but it does really sound like something supernatural or extraterrestrial. Yeah,
otherworldly,
something otherworldly. Yeah,
otherworldly.
Yeah.
Wow. So there you have it, listeners. What do you think? Do you think there's a terrestrial explanation that we're missing out on, or is this the smoking gun that proves the existence of otherworldly beings? Do let us know in the usual means: Facebook, Twitter, or you can always drop us an email or send us a psychic message if you're so inclined. Don't forget to join us next time when we will be discussing, you'll like this one, Neil, with your military background, we'll be discussing the Foo Fighters of World War II.
Looking forward to that.
Absolutely. So, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Until next time, take care.
Stay safe. Keep watching those skies. Bye.
Aliens Explored is a Feegle Films production in association with Juicy Falls. Music by Darren Maffucci and editing by Stu Jackson. Find us on Twitter and Facebook by searching Aliens Explored or visit aliensexplored.com.